Okay, it is 12 noon Central Time, 1 o'clock East Coast time. We are live on Thursday, November 16th. I am your host, Jeff Hyman, and I'm super pumped to have you on the podcast or on the webinar today. And like I said, I'm going to have you out of here in 59 minutes, and I'm going to take you through, as promised, what I have learned the hard way. All of this gray hair is a result of the top 10 recruiting sins. I have committed every single one of them. You probably have too. I'd love to hear along the way. So just type in the chat box if there's stuff you identify with. And of course, I'd love to do live Q&A as we go. So just type in the chat box. I've silenced all the phones just to kind of keep it sane. But if you think of a question, just pop it in the chat box. So let's just make sure we're in the right place. If you can just type in the chat box yes, if this is the webinar that you signed up for. Please type no or talk to your flight attendant if you're flying to a totally different city. But I'm Jeff Hyman, and we're going to get started with 10 deadly recruiting sins, and we're going to plow right into it. So let me start here, which is this guy, and you've hired this guy. I've hired this guy or gal too many times. And when I started my first company, I was 26 years old, and my hiring batting average was pretty bad. Admittedly, I didn't know what I was doing. Sometimes I overhired, sometimes I underhired, made up interview questions on the fly, didn't know what I was doing. And I'm now on this mission to help companies avoid bad hires, no more bad hires. And so if that's of interest to you, then you're in the right place. Because when you make a bad hire, what it quite often leads to is micromanaging, which is painful. And ironically, I've learned that it takes 30 to 50% of your time to micromanage and babysit and coach and counsel and lecture B and C players. And so what I've learned is if you can take that same 30 to 50% of your time and instead invest it on the front end, by hiring nothing but a team of rock stars in every position, every seat in the company, then you can avoid this need to micromanage. Or worse, I'm sure you can identify with this, you can avoid having to fire B and C players. And I don't relish parting ways with people. It's not fun. It is part of our responsibility as leaders. But the more we can minimize it by making sure we avoid bad hires in the first place, life is just better for everybody, right? And so that's what today's webinar is all about. So again, I'm Jeff Hyman, and I'm going to take you through these 10 sins. But before I do, let's just take a second to imagine what life looks like when you have a team of rock stars. You don't have B and C players on that team. For starters, your business is unstoppable. You can compete just by having a team of rock stars, because rock stars perform consistently, they execute, they innovate, they're creative, and your competitors will be left in the dust wondering how you do it. Because, and I'm sure you've seen the same in your industry, industries are becoming very homogenized. Your competitors launch a product, you launch a product, they're identical. You launch a marketing campaign, your competitors copy that marketing campaign within a matter of days or weeks. So the technology advantage has leveled the playing field, whether you're a big company or a 5-person startup. And so what I've learned is that it is a team of rock stars that is now your single best differentiator, your single biggest point of competitive difference. And so imagine if you had that, no more micromanaging, no more babysitting. Type in the chat box and let me know what you think about that. What does that inspire for you, or what does that kind of conjure up? Imagine your whole team top graded to a point where you're unstoppable, where you can deliver consistent results, where you're beating your numbers every quarter, you're shipping your new products on time, you're thrilling your investors, your board, your investors are actually pleased and congratulating for consistent performance. But I can tell you that it will not happen without a team of rock stars. One thing that I don't really understand is leaders who think that if you have a few rock stars and then surround them with the team of B and C players, that's okay. I've never understood that. it seems to me that you need to put a rock star in every seat, in every position. And so that's what this webinar is all about. So type in the chat box if you're ready to go. Just type yes, and I'll quickly introduce myself, and then we're going to kind of get right into it. So I'm Jeff Hyman. I lead an executive search firm based in Chicago. We work nationally with venture capital and private equity portfolio companies. So we specifically focus on growth companies. And I think all the lessons we're going to talk about over the next 50 minutes are relevant to any company. But if you're a growth company or hope to be a growth company, that's where you're going to get the most out of this webinar. Real briefly, I've done the math. I've led to over 3,000 hires. I can assure you I've made every mistake under the sun, partially because I started 4 companies, raised a boatload of venture capital to do that. And some of these were actually recruiting companies. I was lucky to get my start in recruiting at Heidrick & Struggles and Spencer Stuart, which are 2 of the preeminent executive search firms in the world. And they taught me a ton about recruiting, but it wasn't really until I got into the wild and found that theory doesn't necessarily translate to reality. So I've tested a lot of different methods and figured out what works. And I'm now very humbled to teach a course on recruiting to MBA students at the Kellogg School of Management in Chicago. I teach the course on recruiting, and it's been a whole lot of fun. So a lot of what we're going to talk about today is the same stuff I teach my students there, and we're going to get right into 5 essential facts that you got to know to overcome those 10 deadly sins. And don't worry about taking notes. I'm happy to send you this deck. So I'd much rather you focus on the content than scrambling to write it all down. Let me just take a sip, and then we're going to go. Okay, the scary fact, if you take away nothing else from this webinar, but one thing, it is that statistically, 1 out of every 2 people that most companies hire fails. 1 out of every 2. Imagine that kind of result in anything else in business. It would be totally ridiculous, totally inconceivable and unacceptable. Yet that's what most companies do. They leave the outcome of hiring to a coin toss. Half the time it works, half the time it doesn't. In fact, you could scrap your whole recruitment process, save a ton of time and money, and just flip a coin, and you'd have the same batting average, which to me is so ridiculous. The good news is I've learned that you can increase your 50% batting average to 90%. You're never going to be perfect. There's always going to be mistakes. Someone's always going to slip through. But imagine the difference in your business if you could go from a 50% batting average to a 90% batting average. It is a game-changing kind of difference for your business. I don't care what industry you're in, what company size you are, where you are in your company's life journey. But that is the scary fact. Half of new hires are gone within 18 months. 2% of new hires, by the way, don't show up for their second day of work. 2%. Okay, let's go to scary fact number 2. 2/3 of growth companies fail due to people problems. You know, if you talk to leaders, you say, well, what was the problem? It's not product market fit. It's not the dogs aren't eating the dog food. It's not we ran out of money. It's people problems. In fact, you can kind of trace everything to people. 2/3 of companies fail for that reason, which leads us to fact number 3. I have a big chart on my wall in my office, and I write down all the reasons that people have business problems. You know, we're missing the numbers, or our marketing campaign isn't resonating. A new product hasn't shipped yet, or it's got bugs. You can always, 90% of the time, trace these problems back to one thing, which is recruiting. You've recruited the wrong people, or you haven't traded up, or let B and C players fester in the organization 9 out of 10 times. So imagine, again, that you solve these recruiting problems, and yes, you can't do it alone. You're going to need your CEO support, your board support, your team's support. But if you can do that, life gets pretty easy, right? Life starts to change. You start to make your numbers. You start to ship your products. You start to crush your competition, which is what I'm all about. And so that's the scary fact number 3. Number 4, It has never been harder to recruit rock stars. And in a second, I'll give you a definition of what a rock star looks like. But I think you get the point. They're pretty good. And it is hard to find them. We are at the lowest unemployment rate in 17 years. We're at about 4.3%. But that's a blended average. If you look at white collar knowledge workers, it's around 2%. So we're at full employment, right? Rock stars are currently working. And if you're going to recruit them, you have to recruit them. You can't just, post a job posting like you might have during times of high unemployment when that would work. It doesn't work anymore. So we'll talk about where to look in a minute. That's number 4. And finally, number 5. This is a very personal fact. If you want to become a business rock star, I don't care if you want to become CEO for the first time, or you want to keep your job as a CEO, maybe you want to run a bigger company, maybe you just love what you're doing, you just want to up your game, or you want to get on the radar of headhunters, executive recruiters like myself, and you want your phone to ring off the hook, whatever it is, whatever your personal career aspiration. I can tell you that the shortest way there is to learn how to recruit rock stars. If you do nothing but build a great team, a lot of things can go wrong. You don't need the best strategy. You don't need the best product. You have a team that executes flawlessly, consistently, and you will become known as a business rock star. Your phone will ring, I can assure you. So type in the chat box before we move on to these 10 sins. And I promise we're going to get them done by the top of the hour. But I'm curious to know what you think of these 5 facts, if you agree, disagree, any questions so far. So just type right in the chat box, and then we're going to keep going. Okay. It sounds like everyone's tracking, and we are going to dive right into what is a rock star. A rock star, and everyone's got a definition, right? Top performer, A player, whatever you want to call it, right? It's too squishy, so I use the following definition. You can use your own definition, but to me, in my experience, a rock star is someone in the top 5% of talent that is available for a specific role at a specific compensation level. So it's really important to know how much you can afford to pay for a particular position, right? Otherwise, you'll fall in love with a candidate, find out they're twice what you can afford, and you both wasted a whole lot of time. So if I'm looking to hire a director of marketing, $100,000, I'm looking for the top 5% of people at that compensation level for that role. Now, the reason I've identified top 5% is, in my experience, I've hired over 3,000 people, interviewed tens of thousands of people. The top 5% are the game changers. They are the difference makers. If you're in the top half, you're okay. If you're in the top 20%, you're pretty good. But if someone is in the top 5%, they are 2 to 3 to 10 times better in terms of more effective, more efficient, more productive than your average performer. They make the difference. And so a lot of my clients will say, well, those people are expensive. I'll say, yeah, they're not cheap. However, what I've learned is you hire 5 rock stars. You get the work of 10 normal people, and you pay them like 8. So hire 5, pay them like 8, you get the performance of 10. I'd rather have a smaller team of rock stars than a huge sales force or a huge software development team of B and C players. And I hope by the end of this call, you will see it the same way. So that's my definition, top 5%. So with all that said, let's get right into it. We're going to talk about, on the left side, what most hiring managers do. And I'd love to know as we go through this, if you identify with any of these, if perhaps your boss is guilty of some of these. Because again, the average company, and I'm sure you're better than average, but probably not that much better than average, is a 50% hiring accuracy rate, which means if you ask a hiring manager in about a year, are you glad you hired her or hired him? Half the time they will say yes, and half the time they will say no. That's pretty pathetic. We collectively on this call are aspiring to do dramatically better, 90% hiring accuracy. And I can tell you it's totally possible, but you're going to go about it a totally different way than all those other people that are average, okay? And that's what the call is about. Let's get right into the deadly sin number one, which is hiring managers that just get average results. They know it when they see it. They say, I'll figure out what I'm looking for after I see a bunch of candidates, and that will help me figure out what I want. And frankly, there's two big problems with that. First of all, it's super lazy. And second of all, recruiting is a team sport. You're going to have a number of interviewers. I'll say the right number in a second. And you need to agree up front what it is you're looking for. If you don't, the search will take forever. I've seen searches go on 4 months, 6 months, 12 months, because the team is not in agreement on what it is they're looking for. It's far better to have that team agree up front, and it's not quite perfect, than to have 4 different people looking for 4 different things. You'll never get the search done. Now, I mentioned number 4, and that's very deliberate. Some companies will have 2 interviewers, 5 interviewers, 20 interviewers. I don't like to guess. I studied Google, which is good, did a long-term study, and they found that 4 interviewers is the right number. Every interviewer above that, you get only 1% more accuracy. So you need 4 interviewers in the process. We'll talk about that in a few minutes, okay? But that's in front. If you get in front of the process and you develop a scorecard that all 4 interviewers agree on, we all are looking for the same thing, you're well on your way versus average recruiters. So type in the chat box if that makes sense. Let me know if that's something you've been guilty of. Have you been part of a recruiting process where you had a bunch of people looking for a bunch of different things, and how frustrating and how maddening that is? It's not only frustrating, it is the best way to get on this path to settling for a B player. So that is deadly sin number 1. Let's move on to deadly sin number 2. This is one of my favorites. I've made a science of studying what is the most predictive elements of any candidate that you talk to. Most people, again, on the left side, will focus on things like what schools did they go to? What companies have they worked for? What are their titles? Even how much money did they make? There is a now body of science that shows us what is most predictive of success and what is not that predictive of success. It turns out that a lot of these other hiring managers, the ones we're not going to be like, they tend to focus on things that are not predictive of success. In fact, they're not predictive of anything. Industry experience, of course, on the margin, that's great, but by itself isn't that predictive of success. What school someone went to, what GPA they got. Even Google has stopped looking at GPAs. You know, they used to, when they started Google, you had to have like a 3.5 or 3.8. I never would have got in. They've banned that practice because they went back and they found longitudinal studies over time that GPA is not predictive of anything. So we're going to focus on things that are predictive. So on the right, what are we going to focus on? We're going to focus primarily on DNA. Now, to get at someone's DNA, we're going to understand their employers and type and education. I'm not saying those are not important inputs, but what we're looking for is their DNA. What do I mean by DNA? DNA is the essential fabric of a person. It's just like the DNA that makes up their body, their hair color, their eye color, etc. They're going to be short or tall. DNA goes to the personality level as well. And if you talk to psychology, that by age 8, we are pretty much fully baked. In other words, the person I'm going to be, by age 8, I'm pretty much that person. If I'm going to be funny or creative or serious or obsessive compulsive or detail oriented, whatever it may be. And so to focus on DNA gives you the ability to focus on the soul of that person. And if you can find that match between that and the role in your company, you're far better off than focusing on things that are not predictive. Type in the chat box. Let me know if that makes sense. May sound a little bit obvious, but very few recruiters, very few companies focus on DNA. And by the way, I'm not talking about culture fit. That's a whole different story. I'm talking about the DNA of the person. Looks like people are writing, and it makes a lot of sense. Okay? So that's deadly sin number 2. Let's go to deadly sin number 3. In a time with such low unemployment and the need to actively recruit rock stars who are currently working, what most companies do is they write a very boring job description. You've seen this. You've probably written one. Maybe you even apply to your company and after responding to one of these. But number one, they're terrible. But more importantly, they are focused on the employer's point of view. They're restrictive. You've seen, you must have 10 years of this experience. You must have 2 years of that. You must have done this, that, the other. It turns out that Harvard Business Review did an exhaustive study and a great piece in 2014 where they found that a large percentage of people, almost 100% women, will not even apply for a position unless they believe they check all those boxes. And so unless you're really serious about those boxes and those requirements, you're doing yourself a huge disservice. You're weeding out people before you even have a chance to talk to them. At the top of the recruiting funnel, and make no mistake, recruiting is just sales and marketing. You want to widen the funnel. What does work and what I teach you how to do is develop an engaging job invitation. It's an open-ended invitation to have a confidential discussion with the company. It's much more about the company and what we're doing and how we're changing the world than it is even about the specific role. But it's certainly not just about you must have X, Y, and Z requirements or you must have this experience. Once you get them in the funnel, then you can assess, then you can vet, then you can prioritize candidates. But for gosh sakes, get them in the funnel. And so the difference is a boring job description that's restrictive and an engaging job invitation. As an example, one of the companies that I started, we were hiring so many people for about 2 years that we had a full-time copywriter on staff, and he would write the job descriptions, and they were masterful. They were basically advertisements, and they were beautiful. They were funny and humorous and human, and people wanted to talk to us about jobs. And this was during a competitive time period. So that is deadly sin number 3, which is putting your candidates to sleep versus enticing them to have a conversation. And if you have to kind of boil it down to this, it's the mindset is apply here, right? Rockstars don't apply for conversations. They want to talk to you, right? Let's talk. Let's have a confidential conversation. It really is a mindset change in your company. You need to strip away the arrogance and get your CEO, get your coworkers on board with the fact that Rockstars, those top 5% people, they're really hard to find. And you better lose the arrogance and get them into the top of the funnel. So that's deadly sin number 3. Let's go on to number 4. Oh, I love this one. Where do you find these candidates, right? So you've written these great job advertisements. The big mistake the company makes is they post and pray. They throw it up on a job board. They get hundreds and hundreds of responses. Even during this low unemployment time period, you will get a lot of responses. I posted a job recently. I got 350 applicants. 2 were worth the conversation. 2 out of 350. So the yield was pretty pathetic. Well, most companies, they just post and pray. That is their sourcing strategy. And I'm not slamming job boards. I think job boards have certainly a place in the recruiting process. But here's what you're going to do. You're going to tap into your network. There's a very specific methodology that I've learned to do that. But at the end of the day, your employees' network is even more valuable. 50% of your hires should be coming from your employee referral program. There's a whole science about how to create an employee referral program, but let me give you some of the stats. First of all, only 2/3 of companies have an employee referral program. So if you're one of those 1/3, set up a program. Number 2, you don't have to pay a fortune. If you can only afford $500, $1,000, that's fine. Best money you ever spent. Again, Google and other companies have done studies and found that how much you pay actually doesn't change your employees' willingness to introduce you to candidates. So if you can only afford $1,000, that's fine. But your goal should be that 50% of your hires should be coming from your employee referral program. If they're not, and by the way, the national average is about 20%. So if you're closer to that 20-25%, either your employee referral program sucks, and there's ways to beef it up and do it the right way, or your culture, your employer value proposition sucks, and your employees don't want to introduce you to their friends and colleagues and rock stars and former coworkers. In either case, you better figure it out, because that should be 50% of your recruiting. And then, of course, LinkedIn, you can't live without LinkedIn, and there's a whole science on how to put that together. But that is the best way to fill your funnel. Your network, your employees' network, and LinkedIn Advanced Search. Type in the chat box, please, if that makes sense. If you disagree, I'd love to hear that too. And I'm going to take a quick sip, and then we're going to go on to number 5. Okay, great. Looks like everyone's with me. So here we go. We're going to go to the 5th deadly sin. Actually, before we do that, let me just give you some quick numbers. So I've learned this over 25 years of hiring 3,000 people. I've talked to other recruiters, and I get these same numbers almost every single time. And again, I'll email this to you. Recruiting is a funnel, just like sales marketing. Let's start at the bottom. You want to end with 1 Rockstar hire. To do that, you need 2 finalists. 2 finalists that are so good that it's really friggin' hard to make a decision. And the reason I want to do that is in case my first choice says no, I'm still thrilled with the second choice. Okay? If you don't have a backup candidate, you got to restart the whole process. You basically add another 3 months to the process. So you always want to end with 2. To end with 2 great candidates, 2 rock stars, you need to start or get to about 5 fully vetted candidates. By vetted, I mean you've put them through the whole machine, the whole process. To get to those 5, you got to start with about 20 or so that should and could and look like they could do the job and could be a culture fit. It's about 20. And to get to the 20, again, I'm basing this on my experience of many, many, many searches. 150 is the magic number. Now, I hate to talk 150 candidates because that's a shitload of candidates to talk to get to the 20. So the way to bypass that process and that huge step is, again, using your network, your employee referral network, and you can kind of fast forward right to those 20 viable candidates and skip kissing all those frogs of 150 frogs, okay? But if you don't, you're going to start with 150. You'll still wind up with 1 Rockstar hire. But commit these numbers to memory. Teach them to your organization. I'll send this deck to you. This is what I've seen time and time again, and I validated it with other headhunters who have said the same thing. So these seem to be statistically the numbers. Let's move on. Now we've figured out what we're looking for. We have filled our pipeline, our funnel, and we're talking to people. We're talking to candidates. Big deadly sin is wasting your time with bullshit interview questions. I said bullshit. You might say unstructured interview. Basically, you know the questions. I'm sure you've asked a few where you're making up the question on the fly. The question is not predictive of anything. I'll give you an example. Again, Google used to ask these brain teaser questions. Why are manhole covers round? How many dog houses are there in New York City? Turns out these are not predictive of anything other than someone's weird ability to answer strange questions. What is highly predictive is asking structured interview questions and asking the same questions over and over and over. Now, I will be the first to tell you that it makes interviews pretty boring from my perspective, right? I do this all day, every day, and I'm not going to tell you it's my idea of fun because I ask the same questions over and over and over. I don't get to entertain myself by making up questions like some recruiters do. But what it does is 2 things. Number 1, it lets me track the progress of an individual over the course of their career. And I can see if they are tracking up like a stock chart or down or if they've plateaued. Because you've been in 4 positions over the past 10 years. And I ask you the same exact questions. For those 4 positions, I can see he's getting better. She's slowing down. She's hit a wall, whatever it may be. Number 2 is it lets me compare that candidate to other candidates because, again, I'm asking the same questions. So not that exciting, not that entertaining, far more predictive, structured interviews. And I'll even give you the exact questions that I ask word for word. So there's nothing secret or proprietary about it. It's just the discipline of doing it, which most people do not. Okay, let's go to number 6. We're at the bottom of the hour. I want to leave plenty of time for Q&A if you guys would like. And we'll have you done at 12:59 like I promised. Okay, probably the biggest sin of all. Everything I just said about interviews is true. However, interviews are notoriously not predictive. So most people stop right there. They're like, hey, I found our winner. I found our head of marketing. She's amazing. I just had the best interview ever. And they stop the process. They might as well extend the offer that day. Turns out, while interviews are important, they give you important information, they're not overly predictive. And think about it. You've been a candidate before, I'm sure. You've been on the other side of the table. You've been asked a bunch of questions. You fed them your best pitch, right? Because all candidates try to present themselves in the best light. It's just the way we are wired as humans. Well, sitting in a white conference room with that little window and a cup of coffee, turns out is not that predictive of life in the real world, how that candidate is going to perform in the job. So the way to actually do it, is what we're going to do, is we're going to take our two finalists, those two people we talked about, and we're going to put them through a test drive. Now, what is a test drive? Some people call it a job audition. Some people call it a dry run, whatever you call it. It is a 2-hour or 2-day exercise where the individual candidate works with the company to do something that is very representative of the work to be done in the job. So you're basically get a sneak peek at how the person performs. Think about how much more predictive that is than if they were a great interviewer. I've hired a lot of people that frankly were not that great in the interview, but they blew me away. Maybe they were introverted, maybe they were quiet, or just had a bad day, maybe they had a cold. And then I've hired people that were amazing in the interview and they let me down. And I'm sure you've been in the same place. So I'm going to teach you how to do the test drive. It is a 2-hour or 2-day exercise. And I've created a bunch of exercises for every conceivable role. There's not a role yet that I haven't been able to figure out a test drive. Your objection may be, well, Rockstar candidates are working, they're currently busy, they're not going to want to do a test drive. Ironically, the feedback I get from candidates is they love the test drive. Primarily because it shows them that you're serious about recruiting great talent. It gives them a chance to actually understand the work they're going to have to do. So if they hate that test drive, they're going to hate the job, and versa. Third, and finally, it gives them the ability to work with you as their manager to interact, because they're going to present something to you. They're going to take you through the thinking. They're going to sit in a client meeting with you, whatever it is. And they're going to come away and say, wow, I actually love the idea of doing that work every day. So it's very revealing to both the employer, you, and to the candidate. So type in your chat box, please. Promise me that you will never hire another person without doing some kind of test drive. Just say, I promise, or yes. And you'll transform your hiring accuracy because you will reduce your reliance on interviews and supplement it with this very compelling methodology. And by the way, 91% of companies don't do this. 91%. Which is like mind-boggling to me, right? So you'll need to get support. You'll need to get buy-in from your company, or if you're a recruiter, from your client. But 91% skip this, and it's the single best predictive. There was a study done, I think it was the late 80s, and they went back through every single piece of science that had been done about recruiting accuracy, and this was the number one. A test drive or a job audition. So please add it to your process. Okay, let's move on to deadly sin number 7. I'm not going to tell you that checking references is fun, but it is necessary because you've got to validate what you've been told by the candidate, and you've got to validate what you've even seen in the test drive. You've got to trust but verify. There's no question. However, many of my clients do it too late. They check references after they've already made their decision, which to me is, I don't understand. It should be an input into the hiring decision. It shouldn't be after the fact. If that's the case, why do it at all, right? So when you extend an offer pending references, I just don't get that. Number 2, some of my clients only talk to the references provided by the candidate. And you're not going to do that, right? You're going to check backdoor references. This is not a secret. This is not something that only headhunters like me do. But you should be doing it. Just checking backdoor references, people that are not provided to you by the candidate. Now, I'll be honest, 20 years ago, this was super hard. With LinkedIn, this is super easy because in 5 minutes with advanced search, you're finding a list of people that know you and know the candidate. And it ain't that hard to do. You're tracking them down. You're ethically and discreetly reaching out to them and asking for their feedback on the candidate. You will avoid some very bad hires when you talk to people that candidate did not provide you. And you will land some rock stars when people tell you, oh my God, if you don't hire him, you're crazy. So it can go in both directions, but you have to be open-minded. You have to be prepared to walk away from a candidate. And if you're not, save your time, don't check references because you're going to spend a week on this, right? There are times I spend 2 full days checking references on the phone. And so if that's not going to be useful input into the decision process, then please just save yourself the time, skip this step, still do the test drive. But backdoor references have saved me many times. I'll give you a quick example. This was about 3 or 4 months ago. I did a search here in Chicago for a very senior position. Had an interview with a gentleman. Had a second interview with him, about 3 hours total. Put it through my full grilling, and he did amazing. Found a couple of folks that he didn't give me. Texted them, people I knew pretty well. Within about 20 minutes, both of them responded back and said, run, don't walk the other direction. This guy's no good ethically. So they saved me a huge mistake before I had even presented this candidate to my client. So build your network, rely on backdoor references. You'll save yourself a world of hurt. Let's move on to number 8. We've made our decision. We've done the test drive. We've validated through reference checking. Now what do most companies do? They have a template offer letter, which is so boring and uninspiring. And you can think back to our conversation about the job description. It read like a lawyer wrote it, or like an HR person. And I don't mean any foul to HR folks, but it doesn't read like a marketer or like a salesperson wrote it, which is what it should read like. Now, it has to have legal, the legalese and the fine print, of course. But an offer letter should be inspiring. It is an invitation. We're welcoming you to our family. And to use a template is kind of a crime. More importantly, it should come from the hiring manager, not HR. And I've seen this in both ways, and I'm convinced that when you're trying to get a rock star who's currently working and doing great by definition, they're taking a risk. They're taking a risk to join your family, to leave the thing they know, and the grass is not always greener, so they're taking a risk. Hiring managers have a much more personal connection by saying, I want you on my team. I've chosen you, and I want you on my team, versus a third party. Could be a recruiter, could be a HR person. It's just not the same level of intimacy. More importantly, I never give offer letters in writing until we have agreed on the deal, the compensation, the start date, the equity, etc., verbally. Then I provide, only then, the final offer letter, along with, by the way, a 36-hour expiration. Why do I provide a 36-hour expiration, which is known as an exploding offer? It is because I have a backup candidate. And so it's not that I'm trying to pressure my first choice into an answer. It's that I can't afford to lose my second choice. So if my first choice doesn't have enough information yet after 36 hours, he or she probably doesn't want the job. And it's time to move on to number 2. And so there's a whole host of mistakes I've made in there. Many of these deals go wrong, go sideways. About 10, 20, 30%. You can lose a lot of rock stars if you don't handle the offer process smoothly. And many companies don't. So just type in the chat box while I grab a sip and let me know if you've seen that same deadly sin in your company. Maybe you've been a candidate and that whole offer making process was kind of mishandled. It's quite a few people. Okay. Great. Let's move on to deadly sin number 9. This is a big one. Okay. They've said, yes, I want to join you. And they resign from their company. And by the way, you got to handle a counter offer. Because when you're going to play with Rockstars, Rockstars get counter offers. B and C players don't get counteroffers. Rockstars get counteroffers. And if you don't handle that counteroffer and prepare the candidate for the counteroffer and how to handle it, you will lose some. So you got to handle the counteroffer. But they got the counteroffer, said no, they resisted. Now they join you. And what do? Well, you say, or your manager says, well, this is a rock star. She's super smart, super talented. Fill out these HR forms and get her to work day number 2. And just push her in the pool. And while that's very tempting, because this is a Rockstar individual, Rockstars need onboarding as well. Now, onboarding, again, is about as much fun as reference checking, because you're so eager to get this person into seat and into action. But if you're not in it for the long haul and you shortchange that onboarding plan, you can make a big mistake. It's gotten to the point where I won't let my clients or my employees make an offer without me first seeing the onboarding plan. Now, it doesn't have to be accounted for minute by minute over the first 30 days, but there's so many things to teach a new hire, even if they're from the industry, even if they're from a competitor. There's so many things to get them on track with the compensation plan, our products, our services, our pricing, our culture, our values, everything. It takes at least 30 days. Similarly, in the 10 or 20% of the time when you've made a mishire, which again, statistically, is going to happen, we've got to remove those people by day 60. Often by day 30, but certainly by day 60. I very rarely found a case where it makes sense to keep someone on for more than 60 days because you own it. I made a mishire. It's not the candidate's fault. The candidate's not bad. It's my responsibility. And so start to think about an onboarding plan for all new hires and to commit to removing your mishires by day 60. Those other people who have a 50% batting average, they don't do it. They hire people and then they jump right in the pool. Okay, last deadly sin. This is it. Is to treat Rockstars the same as everyone else. So when you're going to play in the league of Rockstars, these top 5% people, they're not necessarily easy to manage. They're not necessarily easy to lead, but they're worth it. B and C players don't expect a whole lot. They don't care a whole lot. You don't have to pay them a whole lot necessarily. But with Rockstars, you must practice what I call differentiation. What is differentiation? Differentiation is the opposite of this approach. Okay? Spreading compensation across everybody, spreading feedback across everybody, spreading benefits across everybody, recognition. Rockstars want to know that they are valued. They want to see the results of their efforts. But the number one thing they want, even before money, is challenge. So they've done a lot of studies that have shown that the number one thing to Rockstars is challenge. So how are we going to challenge your Rockstars? What is their career path? What is their next role? And if it's not a promotion, because maybe you're a small company, is it a lateral? Is it we're going to get you a mentor? We're going to get you a mentee. We're going to give you an international assignment. Whatever it may be, Rockstars respond to challenge. And once they're far less likely to answer the phone when recruiters like me call them. So don't think that money is everything. It's actually number 2. When it comes to money, I encourage you to think about upside variable compensation, whether it's cash, equity, whatever, and don't spread it evenly. Your top performers should get the disproportionate amount of the total. So HR people, see this every day. They ask their hiring managers, how do you want to think about raises next year? And do you want to give a 1% raise or a 3% raise or a 5% raise? That is a waste of time because there's not a big enough differentiation. Rockstars will resent that they only got a 5%. And the bottom performers, why are they getting any raise at all? You want them to leave. So instead, don't use peanut butter. Shift it so that the top performers are getting 10 raises, and that is funded by giving nothing to the bottom performers. And I know that sounds draconian, but that's the way of the world. And if you're going to build a team of rock stars who raise the tide for everyone, that's what it's going to take to keep them. So we've gone through a lot. It's 45 after the hour. I'm going to stick around for questions. I promised you the 10 deadly sins. I can tell you that your company is probably making some today, maybe all of them. If you want to increase your hiring accuracy from 50% to 90%, it is totally doable. I've helped clients do this time and time again. It's not rocket science. I like to say it's simple, but it's not easy. It's not easy because it takes a commitment from everyone. You cannot do this alone. Your colleagues, your manager, your board, your staff all need to be on the same page. So to do that, I've written a book. I'm happy to say, just got the edition. It's available in soft cover and hardcover, and it's available on Kindle as well. Coming out in about 10 days. So if you're interested, I'd be really humbled to know what you think. If you read it, just go to recruitrockstars.com. You can learn all about the book, the contents, download it. The early reviews have been great, and you can learn more about the book. And basically, it just goes through, call it the 10-step playbook to find the winners and ignite your business. And so it's all about how to avoid these mistakes. I gave it to the former CEO of Twitter, Dick Costolo, and he read it one weekend, and he said he loved it, and he's already shared it with a bunch of people. Dayton Ogden, who leads talent recruiting at Summit Partners, which is a $6 billion private equity firm, said it's the one book to read if you're going to read a book about growing your company. And Brad Feld, who's a legend in the venture capital world, he had another company go public this morning, SendGrid, really loved the book too. So I'd love to get it in your hands, and I'd love to hear what you think. Just go to recruitrockstars.com. If that's too big a step, I understand. There's a free way to have a dialogue with me, and that is the Strong Suit podcast. I've just recorded our 170th episode, and so every Tuesday and Thursday, I interview for 20 minutes an expert on recruiting the best talent. So VCs, private equity folks, board members, HR executives. You can sign up on the iTunes store, and I'd love to know what you think of that as well. So with all that said, whether it's the book or the podcast, best way to reach me is my email, but let's open it up for questions. You can just type jeff@strongsuit.com anytime. Send you a copy of this too. But please type in the chat box. And we got 10 minutes. So if there's anyone that has any questions, I'm happy to stick around. A few of you emailed me in advance, and I have those questions as well. So I can read those to you as well. Okay, so while you're typing, I've got one here, which is, how do I get everyone on board in my company to do hiring the right way, or the same way? Yeah, I understand the question. So how do you get everyone on board? Well, you have to be willing to enter the danger and tell your team that you're no longer willing to tolerate mediocrity. Help understand the difference that a top 5% person can make. Again, it's not your opinion, it's science. 2 times, 5 times, 10 times more productive than an average performer. So you got to get them on board with the concept. Then I wouldn't try to change the world overnight. I would start with just 1 or 2 of the 10 things we've talked about. You're going to be tempted to start at the top of the funnel. I actually work from the bottom of the funnel. As with any head of sales and marketing will tell you, you start by removing the obstacles or objections at the bottom of the funnel. So if Rockstar candidates are saying no, find out why and fix that. If you're not getting enough Rockstars, then fix that. If you're not able to get on the same page as to what you're looking for, then fix that. But work from the bottom up as opposed to the top. Measure and track everything. Do quarterly assessments and make sure you're getting the B and C players off the team. Okay, let's go to the next question. Are there any tips on hiring a team versus one person? Much is the same. I think the biggest difference is that when you're hiring a team, let's say you're a CEO of an early stage company and you're about to bring on a whole software development team. Obviously, the relationships and interdependencies between those people is vitally important because you're building a team. A lot of people don't realize that when Michael Jordan played in Chicago, it wasn't until his scoring actually on a personal level was a little bit lower, that's when the team started winning championships. As opposed to the earlier, everyone, but the team couldn't get to the championship. So it is about sometimes sub-optimizing the individual performance of one for the betterment of the team. And I have a whole chapter in the book that kind of talks through that. But Tom, that's kind of what I would suggest thinking about. I would not have the whole team interview every new hire. It's something a lot of early stage companies are tempted to do, again, for interviewers. And what I've learned is one interviewer focusing on work history and going through it in immense detail, and then 3 interviewers focusing on DNA. And again, the book kind of lays out how to do that. Okay, next question. Beyond the test drive, what are the differences in your method versus Top Grading? I am a huge fan of the book Top Grading, written by Brad Smart, who I've had the benefit of meeting, and I'm friends with his son, Jeff Smart. If you can read anything by those folks, get hands on it and read it. It's hugely influenced me over my career. The differences are subtle, and I think probably the biggest one is that Top Grading is, I think, great. If you read it, the book is thick, which, kind of gives you a sense of the methodology and the detail. In a perfect world, it works real well. Unfortunately, we're not in a perfect world, and so it can be difficult to interview a candidate for 6 hours. A lot of candidates just don't have that kind of time or won't give you that kind of time until they're like a finalist, and then you can drill into things a bit more. So I've tried to use my 25 years experience, not just as a recruiter, but build companies. I've started companies to figure out what's the right balance, right, between what's practical in the real world and what is enough detail to make sure I'm getting at 90% accuracy, because I know I'm never going to be 100%. So if I get 90%, I'm thrilled. And I try to do the same for my clients, and I do almost no replacement searches, which happens when a candidate falls out. And so you're never going to be perfect, but I think Top Grading really aspires to be perfect. I'm just not sure that it always is possible in today's competitive talent landscape. It also was written, 20, 25 years ago. Okay, we have time for one more question. If there's anyone else, just type it in the chat box, and I'm happy to answer it. But again, feel free to email me, jeff@strongsuit.com, and I'll answer any questions. Or if you're interested in taking a look at recruitrockstars.com, you can take a look at the book as well. Okay, great. So thank you so much for joining this webinar, The 10 Sins. If you think it would be useful for others in your company, I'm happy to arrange another webinar just for them. And so we can do that as well. Okay, with that, have a great week, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.